Good morning. We're ready to go now. Rashid, over to you.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this second of our bidding skills webinars, which is all designed to help you as SMEs get better, get more confident at writing winning bids for both public and larger private sector organisations. So some of you may have been with us on the first session. If you haven't, that's no problem. You'll still learn stuff, which is great. So usual ground rules, I think you know it by now. Cameras off, please keep yourself on mute. If you want to ask any questions, put some things in the chat and we'll look at that either during or at the end. And the other thing I would ask you to commit to do, if you've been with me before, you'll know that I always ask this, is commit to do something as a result of this webinar. We've all been and sat through these sort of webinars where we have good intentions to go away and change things in our business. But actually, if you make that commitment to yourself, there's more likelihood that you'll actually move your business forward and get better at bidding and tendering. So make that commitment, please, and it'll be much more successful for all of you. Okay, so I'm just going to get my screen up for us. Just bear with me 2 seconds. Right, okay, well, hopefully you can all see that. So a very brief sort of 30-second whistle-stop tour of my 40-year background. So 30 years with Lloyds. My usual joke is that I was one of the good bankers, which of course I was, but on a serious note, I spent a lot of time looking and responding and dealing with very large complex tenders, both for international banks, and also whilst I was head of the government team at Lloyds, where we were bidding and looking at renewals for both local authority contracts and central government departments. So a reasonable amount of experience on the bidding front. Also part of a number of these programs, including the Hounslow Fit to Bid program, which was a similar one to this, helping SMEs getting better and improving their bidding skills. And as you'll see, I'm a mentor and advisor at the British Library and locally in my own area in Harrow, supporting businesses. I've probably done about 100 or so one-to-ones over the last year, 18 months in lockdown, so it's been interesting. I've also got a small social care business that I run as well. So that's 40 years condensed into 40 seconds. Right, so let's just talk a little bit about the program and what we're going to do. The key word here is, of course, it's a bidding skills webinar, but it's an interactive webinar, as I said. So do put some things into the chat. The first webinar I did was a couple of weeks ago. This is a follow-on from that. And as it says, it's all based around the principles of best practice and excellence in selling. And what I mean by that is that the bidding process is a selling exercise. It's not an administrative task. Because if you treat it as a form-filling exercise, then you're more likely to be on the way to submitting a bid that won't be successful. So you're always selling yourself and your business. These are the things that we've either covered in the first session or will be covering today. So we'll look at a whole host of reasons that we did in the first time around. I'll give you a reminder about why organisations go to tender, what they look for, getting the basics right. And I also sort of introduced to you some golden rules about understanding questions, analysing them carefully, and then doing things like articulating benefits, providing evidence, researching your client, which will all help you to write a more compelling, accurate and concise bid. So we've got quite a bit to get through this morning, but it's all going to be great stuff. There's a slide there which just shows you where the previous recordings are held. And so if you missed the first one and you wanted to sort of go and have a look at that, then you can do that. And it will just give you some ideas and tips from the first session. So briefly, who are we? We're Branduin. We're a group of business advisors, specialist business advisors in the London and the South East area. And I guess what's unique a little bit about us is we've all run our own businesses, or we do run our own businesses, so we have technical and practical experience. And we work, as it says, with local governments, with local chambers of commerce, delivering programs like this on their behalf. And we tend to work with a number of different specialists. We work with, obviously, the end user SMEs, and we've got some support programs we've been running throughout the lockdown process, including a peer network program and Fit to Bid, which is what this is all based around, helping you to get better at bidding and tendering. So the program what we'll do today, and what we've done in the first session, is we'll talk to you about engaging with procurement, because of course a lot of larger customers, they'll be dealing through a procurement department. There's also an online bid capability questionnaire, which again, if you haven't completed, I'd encourage you to do so. It literally takes you 5 minutes, and it will give you an assessment of where you are in terms of your bidding skills, which of course we will also address during this webinar. It's a sales process, as I said, and there are also confidential one-to-one business advice sessions available to any businesses on the programme in the Hammersmith and Fulham Borough. So do take advantage of those. There are 2 sessions. I'll talk more about those later. So let's launch. The programme, and I would say this, but I believe it genuinely, has a lot of benefits. It's a really great programme in so much as it's quite comprehensive. It runs right through to the year end. And like it says on the screen, we'll do an assessment of your bid writing skills, and we'll give you the tips, techniques, and knowledge that we've found, that I've found through submitting tenders based around best practice. I said earlier that there's 2 one-to-one confidential advice sessions, and the whole idea is we'll get you to a situation where you're a bit more confident in submitting what's called an expression of interest, showing that you're interested in bidding for a certain contract from either the public sector or a private sector supplier. We'll help you with writing and submitting winning bids. We'll also take a wider look at you and your business using the business model canvas approach, all based around the tender. And additionally, what's your value proposition? We won't leave you to flounder in between all these things that are going on. There's constant engagement throughout the programme, and we'll give you ongoing and regular feedback. There's a lot of good stuff available to you as businesses on this programme. So I just want to give you a little reminder of what we covered in part 1. So I think it's important if people weren't there, or even if you were there, it's good to remind ourselves the things we covered. Essentially, I looked at things like, why do organisations go to tender? What do they look for? And that included things like enabling them to make a fair and objective comparison, and hopefully, as part of that process, reducing supplier selection risk. We talked about having the right policies in place, and also achieving a sustainable competitive price, not necessarily the lowest price. So I mentioned things about knowing your competition, knowing your market, knowing the price. As I said, the client will be looking for a return on investment, for value for money. So it's not the case that cheapest wins. That's definitely not the case. They'll be looking for you to demonstrate how you can improve their efficiencies, how you can save them money, and preferably show and demonstrate that you can measure that. I talked about having an innovative mindset. And what I mean by that is getting into the mindset of the actual client. Because if you understand what they really are trying to achieve for the tender, you're more likely to really be able to provide them with a compelling winning bid. We talked about competence. How are you going to carry out the actual service that they're requested? Are you a cultural fit for the organisation? Do you have a problem-solving ethic? Do you sort things out when things go wrong? So there are lots of things that the client will be looking for when they go out to tender, because it's quite an involved process for both them and yourself. Talked about getting the basics right, and that is, to an extent, a form-filling exercise, in so much as there'll be things like a supplier questionnaire. We'll have to complete information about you, your company, financials. If it's a public sector bid, you might have what's called a form of tender, which they ask you to sign. That's all about essentially confirming you've read it and understand the terms and conditions. You might be able to be asked to provide some financials, references, referees. Make sure you advise the referees in advance. You probably need to provide some policies to prove that you have certain policies and health and safety or other requirements in place. And typically you'll have a pricing template to complete as well. And I also touched upon the importance of planning your response and researching the client. I introduced some golden rules to you. We talked about how to assess and fully answer questions, and understanding the organisational objectives, both now and in the future, where you could go to find that sort of information out, where you could research information, what to look for. There's a whole host of information out there, and it's really just a case of knowing where to look and finding it. And we talked about the evaluation process, how you can differentiate, how you can maximize your score for the evaluators. So there's a number of things that we cover in the first part, which are very relevant to this session, just to sort of give it some context. I just wanted to sort of touch upon that. And really, the more you know about your client in advance, the better it is for you when you're submitting your bid. Okay, so as I said, I started to introduce to you some golden rules, some concepts, and what forms a winning bid. Having the right price and knowing your market, as I said, not necessarily the cheapest price. We did some exercise. We did an exercise around answering the questions properly, breaking them down into their component parts, so that you give your chance you give yourself the best possible chance of getting a good score with the evaluator. We looked at their broader needs and objectives. What's their strategy? What's their thinking going forward in terms of the next, not necessarily just 6, 12 months, but what they're thinking about in the next 2, 3, 5 years. You can get your head around that, you'll be in a much stronger position. So we cover those things in the first session. And basically then we talked about how do you demonstrate that you've got a credible, competent solution? How can you show that you can deliver the service that's being requested? We've touched briefly on benefits. What's in it for the client? They don't really care what you can do. What they want to know is how it helps them, how it benefits them. So we'll talk about that a bit more today. We talked about the importance of evidence, supporting what you're saying to make your story stronger and convince the client that you're the person, you're the business they should choose. And finally, we're going to talk about how to write in a clean, clear, precise way, which makes it quite a lot easier for the evaluators. So we'll cover those last 4 elements in the session this morning. So I hope that's all clear. Okay, so first golden rule. If you're thinking of climbing a mountain, is an analogy, you'd probably do a bit of planning, wouldn't you? You'd think about what equipment you need. You'd think about what's your route? What's the level of experience you have? What's your skill levels? Do you need someone to help you? What are the weather conditions? And what's the best approach to get you to the top? And the point of explaining that is you need to do exactly the same thing in terms of process when you're considering submitting a tender response. So planning is critical, and you need to also be able to explain that in a way that's clear and understandable to the client. Because the better you can do that, the more you can demonstrate your thought process, the stronger position you will be in terms of your bid. So, as I said, demonstrate your thought process, demonstrate your approach. So, that all comes down to the how question. That's the overarching question. How are you going to deliver? And how equals who, what, when, where, and I'll just move that so I can see the last bit of my slide. Why? How could I forget that? Okay, so how are you going to demonstrate that you can execute the work? How are you going to show them that you've got the competence and the experience to do what's being asked of you as a potential supplier? How can you substantiate that? And who's going to deliver this? You know, if you're a one-man band, it's probably going to be you yourself. But, you know, if you're a larger organization, potentially you could have partners, you could have subcontractors. When you're doing your planning, it's good to specify who's got accountability for certain elements of the response, who's got accountability for certain elements of the delivery. And use names, make it more personal. Help the prospective client understand who's going to be dealing with this on their behalf. And what's your approach? When I say what's your approach, what steps are you going to take? What methodology do you use? Have you got experience of managing projects of the type you're being asked to? What are the deliverables? How are you going to measure those deliverables? What things do you need? What equipment, what products, what resource to help you to deliver that service? And what SLAs are you going to put in place? If you haven't heard, I'm sure you have, but SLAs are service level agreements. And essentially what they do is they document the terms under which you'll be providing the service that's being requested. So how are you going to demonstrate that you'll meet those service level agreements? And when you're going to deliver it, all projects will have deadlines and milestones of a sort. How will you demonstrate that you can meet those deadlines? How will you measure them? How will you monitor them? Who's going to track them within your team? How can you show people, how can you show the client that you'll be able to deliver on their timings and their requirements? Because this is all critical to the process. If you can't demonstrate that, then you'll be putting yourself in a weaker position. And where are you going to carry out this work? You know, are you going to be at the client's premises? You know, in the last 2 years, that's been quite difficult with COVID. So consequently, you might be having to do something remotely. You might be doing it at your own premises. There may be an off-site facility you're using. You might be using the facilities of a partner. Where are you going to carry this out? Where's the geographic location of what you're going to do and how? So again, think about how you explain that in your response. And finally, why? What's your rationale and your thought process behind the approach you're taking? Why have you chosen this option? What other options perhaps have you considered and discounted? And as it says, how do you link that evidentially? So how do you provide evidence that you can deliver? And also, how do you link it to the benefits? So there's a real thorough, comprehensive approach you need to take and demonstrate to help the client understand how you're going to provide the service that they're requesting and needing, and articulating that in a simple, common sense way. I hope that all makes sense. So let's talk about USP, unique selling proposition. What makes you stand out? What differentiates you from your competition? And I think the word unique is often used too casually, too commonly. We hear people saying, well, it's fairly unique, it's partly unique, but actually it can't be fairly or partly unique because, as it says on the definition, unique is of which there is only one, unmatched, unequal, having no like, equal, or parallel. That's a bit of a mouthful. So basically, you're either unique or you're not. So when I'm talking to businesses, often we will talk about their unique selling proposition. I might say to them, well, what's your unique selling proposition? And think about that yourself. We won't do that as an exercise now, but think about it. And very often, a business will say to me, we provide great customer service. Well, do you know what? I'm afraid that's not unique because I've never spoken to a business and said, tell me how good your customer service is, and they've said it's awful. They will generally all say, we provide a great customer service. So it's not unique. What you could say in a business I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, explained, is they've got more 5-star Google reviews than any of their competition. Now that's unique. That's unique, and it's demonstrable and it's measurable. But as it says, you can overcome a lack of uniqueness by being innovative in the way you handle what's typically a standard approach. So what do I mean by that? You could have a unique proposition, as I think we did in the bank, God knows how many years ago, where you had to answer the phone within 3 rings or 4 rings. So, you know, the USP might be, we always answer our phone within 4 rings, or we always return our messages same day. So those are actually unique ways of handling a standard approach. And it gives you an advantage. It's what's called, I guess, a positive discriminator. And it shows how you can do things and meet the customer requirements better than your competition. And that's what you're trying to do. You're always trying to stand out and be better than your competitors. So think about what is your unique selling proposition. So, golden rule, all this stuff is good, but so what? So what does all this mean? As it says on the slide, include benefits. It's no good telling a client what you can do. It's about what it means to them and how it links back to the client. So, explain what you do and link it to a benefit with a phrase that says, which means that. So, you might say, we've worked on a similar contract, which means that we've learned and adapted our solution for you to give you an even more cost-effective response. And if you can show and demonstrate how you can improve the process, increase productivity, save time, reduce costs, then you're going to be in a much stronger position. And if you can measure it and demonstrate that, it's even more powerful, because being able to measure it demonstrates tangible added value. But always think benefits. Okay, so to recap, we've understood the requirements, we've read the questions properly, we've done a bit of research, we've hopefully spoken to the client to get a bit of a relationship going. We've started to explain how we'll meet their needs and explain the benefits. How do we make our story more compelling? How do you make it more believable? So first chance for you to do a bit of work. What I'd like you to do is just have a think for a minute now of typically what sort of benefits you could articulate in a solution. It's a generic solution, but just spend a moment now putting some information into the chat about what benefits your company could provide and how you could explain that you've got added value. So I'll give you a 30 seconds or a minute. Now's just going to kindly sort of monitor the chat for me. So don't sort of be shy, don't hold back. Please do put some stuff into the chat, and I'll give you a minute to do that while you have a little think. Do have a go, people, because if you force yourself to think, you're more likely to learn. I will give you some of these answers after, as you'd expect. But from your own unique business perspective, think about what benefits you provide to your client. Excellent. I've just seen the chat go up by 1. So someone's put something in the chat, so that's excellent. As I said, you're more likely to learn by having a think and writing something down. I'm a bit old-fashioned in that way. I feel that, if you write things down, you're more likely to have to think about what you're saying, and you're more likely to commit to it and actually come up with a better end result and a better response. So, yeah, the chat's
we have a couple. One is from Sharon saying that, is being a social enterprise a benefit in itself? Can you answer that, please?
Well, I suppose it depends on the sort of contract that you're bidding for. I mean, certainly it helps differentiate you in your business, and that's a good starting point. But I guess over and above that, what benefits does your solution provide? I think that's a benefit in terms of your entity status, certainly, but it's not going to be the differentiator between you winning or winning a contract. It certainly doesn't do any harm.
The other question from OB is, or a comment, sorry, is we provide the local authority with a diverse range of clients. Okay. So it sounds like from that you've currently got some sort of relationship with the local authority as well. And I guess I don't know what service you provide, Obi, but if one of the things they want from you is introductions to clients across a broad spectrum, then I guess, yes, that would be a benefit. It's a little bit harder to answer that without a bit more context, but I hope that helps. Another one is we provide a business startup advice within a group, providing new businesses with a network of relatable new businesses.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's certainly a benefit. And I suppose I go back to what I said earlier. That's great you do that, and the linking phrases, which means what to the end client. So what does that mean? How does it help them? But certainly, in terms of what you do, that would be a strong feature which you just need to sort of articulate to explain how it adds value.
Okay, Mark, just a point here. I'm not sure has a slide on precise writing, so we're going to come back to your chat message and have a relook at that.
Yeah, we'll definitely. Yeah, we can definitely need some writing. Okay, well, listen, thank you everyone for having a bit of a go on that. As I say, it does help and forces you to think a bit harder when you have to write stuff down. So appreciate your input on that. So, as I said, I was going to give you some of the answers. These are generic benefits, but they're benefits that you can then relate to your business. So how does your solution save time, save management time? Does it reduce costs? Does it eliminate risk? Does it help boost staff morale, grow turnover? One of the key things that's quite topical at the moment is waste reduction and being environmentally friendly. Does it have a
positive environmental impact? Does it reduce staff turnover? There are a whole host of primary benefits, as we say, which you can demonstrate, put you in a stronger position. And then basically, with the benefit, try to attach, as I said, a measure and quantify the benefit. Because if you can do that, you're going to be in a significantly stronger position, because everyone can say how they're going to, their solution is going to save time, it's going to reduce costs, and all those great phrases. But if you can actually quantify it, measure it, it creates a much greater perception of the tangible value you can add as a supplier. So think about those benefits and also how you can quantify and measure them. And how do we get people to believe more about all these benefits? It's all well and good to say all these things. And the next golden rule is people buy when they believe what you're saying. And it's like, you know, when you're in a court of law, you have to present your evidence. You have to present your case studies. If you can do that, then you're going to be in a significantly stronger position, because everyone will be saying all these good things. But if you can demonstrate it with evidence, hard, compelling evidence, you're going to be in a much, much stronger position. So, what's your story? Everyone likes a great story, right? So here's one thing for you to think about to start with. You can pop something in the chat if you want, or just think about it for a minute. What would your clients say about you if they were asked? What would they say about you and your business? If you want to share something in the chat, feel free. I'm only going to spend sort of 30 seconds on this, but it's a key question. You know, people like the story, like the history. So what would your clients say about you? That's the first thing I'd like to get you to think about. And then even more importantly, what would you want them to say? You know, if I said to one of your clients, what do you think about XYZ Limited? What's really good about the service they provide? What would you want them to say? Because it's always significantly more powerful if one of your clients says how good you are, or how you provided a great service, or how you provided a great solution, rather than you standing up and saying what a great supplier, what a great provider you are. So just think about that, even in your own time. So let's have a little exercise on evidence. And it's all around, how do you make your story more believable? How do you back up all those positive, strong words that you said about what you can do? So I'm going to give you a minute for that. Have a little think and see what it is you can do to provide evidence. I can see the chat going up, so that's great. Now, so feel free to enlighten me on what's being said, if you would, when you get a minute. Okay, anyone got anything else? Yep, I can see the chat going up. Now, so have we got some interesting commentary in the chat?
We have a couple of points here which are common, in fact, to everybody. It says your customer case studies, use case studies and recommendations from previous clients as well. Fantastic. So that makes sense.
Yeah, that's all good stuff. So that's excellent. So fabulous. All right, well, let's actually have a look at some of the various different types of evidence that we can provide. So the strongest form of evidence is what we call objective evidence. So it's externally provided. So you might have some sort of accreditation. You might be ISO 9001 qualified in your business, which shows that you have proper systems and processes which have been externally tested and accredited by an external source. That's strong. You may have had a positive audit done, some external market surveys. You might have actually done some demonstrations on your service and your offer. Testimonials, very, very powerful, very powerful. As I said, it's so much stronger if your client's saying how good you are, what a great service you provided, how you met the problem and sorted out a solution, than you saying it. Have you got references you can provide? Have you had awards, won some, awards for, best innovative business, for example, or, best new startup? You might invite prospective clients to come to your premises to see what it is you do, how you do it. And that sort of provides a level of comfort and a level of understanding of your expertise. And if you're really confident about what you do in your service, you may even provide some sort of financial guarantee. So these external third-party forms of evidence are particularly strong because they're being said by someone other than yourself. And then there's additional evidence by way of things like case studies, similar in a way to testimonials, but probably a little bit more detailed because you can go into a bit more background as to what you've done and what the problem was of the client. You may have fixed, established operating procedures and project methodology. How can you demonstrate that you've run projects like this in the past? Are you project Prince qualified, for example? Prince 2 is like an external project management qualification. Do you have someone in your team who's managed projects like that and can demonstrate they've done it effectively with all the right checks and measures and timelines and goals and milestones and all those good things? That also adds weight and strength to your argument in your case. And then you've got internal evidence that you provide as a company. You might have brochures, you might have marketing material which you produced, which sort of basically backs up what you say. And you're saying, look, trust me, because this is all the great stuff we do. Here are some surveys we've done for our clients, and this is what they've said. You'll have your own policies in place. You may have CVs, and we'd encourage you to have little bios of people within your marketing material, perhaps a picture. It just all makes it a little bit more real. And again, it's useful evidence, but it's not as strong as the third-party objective evidence because you're actually producing it yourself. So you could sort of say anything, but as we said, you can back it up hopefully with things like client case studies, client studies, that clients' testimonials, that type of thing. And then you may be working in a sector which has some sort of regulation around it and has a standard approach to operating. And that also gives the client an element of comfort, but it's not unique to you because everyone operating within your sector would actually be operating under those same terms and conditions. So I guess it's the weakest form of evidence because others, including your competition, can rely on it as much as you, but it's still worth pointing that out. And then we've got what we call operational evidence. And this is very much where you're the existing supplier. So you may be bidding for a contract renewal, because certainly with the public sector and also with some private sector companies, the contract term, the tender, will be for a fixed term. It might be 2, 3, or 5 years. So if you're the incumbent, if you're the existing supplier, then you should be in a much stronger position to show, how you implemented your solution. What sort of management information and performance data do you have? What reports have you been providing to the client during the term of the contract? Have you got some customer feedback from the client during the time of the contract? Can you demonstrate how you've made improvements, measurable added value, innovative ideas? What positive impact have you had on the client? When they've had particular problems, issues, challenges, how do you resolve them? Like I said earlier, do you have an innovative problem-solving mindset? Do you take ownership for things when they go wrong? Because things definitely go wrong. We know that in life, that's just how things are. But it's how you resolve them and move forward that is actually as powerful. And even during the term of the contract, have you had some positive feedback from, the end client or other stakeholders? And you can build up a bank of ammunition, of data, of evidence, which you can then use and collect for when you're bidding for renewing a contract. So there's a variety of different types of evidence that you can put together, and you can start building that, before you actually get to the tendering process. It's good for your business generally. So what are some of the rules of evidence? Well, firstly, provide evidence that's relevant to the bid, relevant to the client, the market, to the service that's being requested. For example, if you're bidding for a local authority contract, have you done work in the sector for other local authorities? as I said, I spent 4 years dealing with local authorities for Lloyds Bank, and I know for a fact that they all talk to each other, certainly within the area. So if you've got a case study or you've got some feedback from another contract you've worked on with the local authority, it's much, much more powerful. Make sure the evidence is as current as possible. Again, when you're looking at any business, well, when I'm looking to talk to any business or even buy something myself, the first thing I do is I go on Google and I look at the Google reviews. If there are none, that's an immediate red flag for me. So I think, well, why is that? If there are some, but they're a year old, that's also a bit of a sort of question mark for me. But if they're current, you don't have to have hundreds and hundreds. If they're current, they say the right thing, and it's so much more powerful. And like I just said a moment ago, spend time building up that evidence. Build in getting case studies or testimonials or Google reviews into your process. You don't have to do that for every single client, but do it selectively at the end of a contract or at the end of a service you've offered. You know, it doesn't have to be particularly time-consuming or complex, but if you can build up a bank of case studies, a bank of testimonials and evidence, it's going to make you and put you in a much stronger position. So include that in advance in your planning process, because by doing that, you'll basically put yourself in a stronger position with the evaluators, because the evaluators are always looking for evidence of what you're saying. It just strengthens your case and strengthens your brand. Okay, so let's move on to the next golden rule. I think someone was talking about writing styles earlier, so we're going to spend a little bit of time on that. And the first golden rule in terms of writing is less is more. And there's a real skill in doing this. And basically what I'll show you over the next few slides, and we'll go through in terms of writing, can be used in any written communication that you're doing, not just tenders and bids. So it's going to be hopefully quite useful. So, the first thing is, the evaluators, they're all busy people, to put it mildly. And so, you know, they're not going to dig and look too hard to find the answers. So make it easier for them to evaluate your bid in a concise way. Don't waste their time, don't distract them. That can be quite a key differentiator. These people are humans, it's not typically their day job. Try not to provide too much information to distract them. Keep on point, keep on message, and that will certainly be a differentiator between you and your competition. There's a number of rules here that we'll just run through briefly. And again, it's all about being precise and using clear language. So, you know, don't use metaphors. Metaphors are things like, it's raining cats and dogs, they've got a heart of gold, or something like that. You might have seen that in print, but it doesn't really work when you're responding to formal bids. Don't use long, complicated words, phrases, when a short one will do. What I always say is, write the way you speak. I was told that in my banking days years and years ago. So, for example, let me give you an example I've written down here. It says, don't say, for example, do say, we'll show you how our proposed solution will reduce costs by 10%. Rather than saying, our leading edge methodology and option analysis will demonstrate increased efficiencies across your process. You know, it's management speak, it's not clear, it uses too many words. So write the way you speak, and that'll stand you in pretty good stead, and it will reduce the word count. And it says, take words out if they're superfluous, don't use them. Don't use the passive, use the active, and I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Don't use Americanisms, jargons, foreign phrases. Basically use the everyday English equivalent, write as you speak. And the final point I just want to make is, okay, in the worst situation, break any of those rules rather than saying something that's just irrelevant. Don't pad out your response just for the sake of adding more information that's not relevant. Sometimes you'll be under a word count, so you'll have a maximum word count you're allowed to use in a certain section of the tender response. So take words out if you can do. The other example I was going to say to you, write for the audience you're trying to get your message across to. my son, my older son, he's an engineer with Aston Martin, no free cars, unfortunately. But essentially, if I was writing something to him, I wouldn't be able to. You'd have to use much more technical language. But if you're writing something for, I know for myself, if you use that technical language, it would go straight over my head. So write to the audience is what I'm saying there. So I was talking about active versus passive writing. So generally, never use the passive where you can use the active. You can Google that, but I'll give you an example if you like. So reduce word count, first of all. So a passive statement would be, Oliver Twist was written by Charles Dickens, 7 words. But being more positive and writing it in the active, you would say Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist. So 2 things. First of all, it's basically a smaller word count, and it's a more succinct, powerful statement. So typically use the active rather than the passive. Although like every rule, there are always exceptions. An exception might be, passive here is, the opera singer was heckled by an onlooker in the crowd. And the active is, an onlooker in the crowd heckled the opera singer. In this phrase, the opera singer is the key person within the sentence. So on this occasion, actually the passive is okay to use. So again, subtle differences, but generally use the active because it's much more assertive in terms of coming across and uses less words. So avoid jargon, don't speak in American isms, don't use hyperboles as opposed to hyperboles, as it's pronounced, it's hyperboles. And they're exaggerated statements, things like, I'm so hungry I can eat a horse. Well, you probably couldn't eat a horse. So, don't use business jargon like blue sky thinking or outside the box, just write in clear English and you'll make your message come across in a much better, concise way. And sometimes I see people, for emphasis purposes, putting big capitals in a proposal. And I would say avoid that. It just distracts, it looks messy, it just doesn't have the impact that you want. It's like it comes across as shouting. So I wouldn't use capitals randomly in any tender response proposal. And be assertive. So don't say can, say will. It's a much more positive statement, definitely. So no coulds, would, should, we propose, will. Much more assertive, much more positive, definitive. Another common error that I see in writing is people using the plural when referring to companies and organizations. So we should say, in this instance, Branduin is running this webinar, this workshop, as opposed to Branduin are running this workshop. So, got a little exercise for you to think about here, just conscious of time, we're okay just for a moment. So, you may not have time to do this now, but just have a quick look at that for 30 seconds and think and pick out, for your own benefit, what are the key words in that big, long paragraph. You can rewrite it separately. I'll give you the answers in a moment. I mean, you can use something similar for your own practice purposes later, but just have a think about what are the key words in that paragraph. What are the things that need to stay in to keep the message the same, but not have such a long paragraph? Okay, conscious that time is ticking, I'll give you the answer, but as I said, you can practice this yourself on any written communication you've written within your organization. So to start with, it was 61 words, okay? And the words in red are the words that are key to the message that we want to get across to the client. I'm not going to read it all through, you can read it for yourselves. The point I'm making is there's a lot of fluff, there are a lot of additional extra words around the sides which are not necessarily needed. So 61 words to start with, and guess what? By slimming it down, and you can read it for yourself, you can basically reduce the word count by more than 50%. More than 50%. And like I said, an evaluator, they'll want the succinct, clear written response. They won't want the wordy, fluffy response, but they're trying to look to see what you're trying to say within that. So have a little go perhaps at home on anything that you've written, pick out a paragraph and just try and work on slimming it down and keeping it much more punchy, precise and clear. So let's look at some redundant words and phraseology. So quite simply, the words in red, the phrases in red could be slimmed down by the words on the right in green. So on a regular basis, regularly, has an ability to, can. Again, this is talking about how you speak. You would almost certainly say, I can attend the webinar, as opposed to, or I would say, I can deliver the webinar, hopefully I can, as opposed to, I have an ability to deliver the webinar. It's just much cleaner, it's much more precise. It may well be that, not perhaps. There are a number of ways you can reduce the word count down. And here are a few more examples briefly. I'm not going to run through them all, don't worry. I'll just pick out 2 or 3 for your, for example's sake. After careful scrutiny. Well, scrutiny by its definition means you're looking at something carefully. So you don't have to carefully scrutinize something, you scrutinize it. We will entirely eliminate. Well, eliminate means get rid of completely, entirely. There's no need to. It's mostly foreign imports. Well, I've never come across an import that's not foreign because they come from abroad. So you can see there are often additional words that people put into written communication, which you can slim down, which makes it, first of all, more clear, reduces the word count and makes it easier for evaluators. The example I give from my own background very briefly is when I was in the bank, we had some relationships with some very large international banks. I was working with Lloyd's, we worked with large American banks, and occasionally the 2 chief execs would meet and I had to write a 1-page brief summarizing the bank's relationship with the client. You try and get what we had was probably 20 files this thick worth of information onto 1 page. And I can tell you that's quite a challenge. But it's not for my benefit, it's for the reader's benefit. That's the whole point, for the evaluator's benefit. We want to make their life easier. I want to make my chief executive's life easier when he's reading. He's just got the key facts he needs. So take out redundant words. As it says, use fewer words because evaluators will appreciate it. And by writing this sort of style, by writing cleanly, positively, assertively, clearly, you'll come across, your bid will come across much better and the evaluators will appreciate it. And that is a potential differentiator for you and your business. So I hope that's been helpful. So to summarize on the workshop, you need to comply with all parts of the ITT, the invitation to tender. You need to have made sure you've read the questions carefully. You need to answer that question, why you? What makes you stand out? Why would the client choose you? And focus on the benefits. Focus about what it does for the customer. Remember, as it says, it's about the customer. It's not about you. It's about demonstrating the value you can add to solve their problem. Have you explained your approach? Have you described those benefits and value? Have you priced it correctly? Is your proposal well written, like we've just talked about? Is it professional, easy to understand? Have you had someone proofread it over? Always do that, not just for mistakes, but just also ensure that their interpretation of your response to the answer actually reads well. Because when you're doing a tender response, you might be immersed in it for a few days, maybe even weeks, and you just start not to see the obvious. And as it says at the bottom, how can you make it easiest for the evaluators to look and see that you've responded, answered the questions fully, and therefore they can give you a good score? And finally, how do you prove all this stuff? What's your evidence? What makes you unique? How do you differentiate from your competition and prove that your approach and your response is believable? So there's lots of good stuff to think about there. Hopefully it hasn't sort of bombarded you too much. But that's a summary of what we've talked about now and in the first session. And the final golden rule, maybe it's politically incorrect, but it's not the taking part. It's the winning that matters. And if you can incorporate the sort of things that we've talked about in the first webinar and now, you're going to be in a much stronger position. Because at the end of the day, it is winner takes all. Right, okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is I just want to run through some things that will be useful for you very briefly. So
Nashir, just a point here, Nashir, we are happy to extend the webinar for another 10 minutes. We want to spend a little more time on the next few slides, so please take your time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Naz. Appreciate it. So where can you find all these opportunities? You know, where do councils, where do local authorities, where do tier 1, tier 2 private sector organisations advertise these contracts? Well, you can see there in terms of Hammersmith and Fulham, the links for London local authorities and government organisations. There's the link there, and there's a national one as well. There are hundreds of places where larger companies advertise. But what you need to do is have a think about the sort of organisations you're targeting. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then get yourself registered for alerts on the sort of contracts that are coming up from these larger organisations that you're looking to target. Start building relationships with these people, start to get to know the procurement department, build up your evidence. So get yourself registered on these various portals where they're advertising relevant contracts to you and your business. So using Hammersmith as an example, Hammersmith and Fulham, they want to make it easier for you as local suppliers. They want to try and extend their supply chain locally, as I talked about in the first webinar. So it shows you there the sort of areas that Hammersmith and Fulham spend, how much they spend, and what are the top 10 categories. So that immediately gives you an idea of where they actually spend their money and which of those areas are relevant to you and your business. Not only do that, they go a bit further. They show you by sector what are their top categories for spend. This is all to do with capital expenditure and maintenance. And then additionally, they've given you a bit of a steer as to what type of businesses they believe could help meet the requirements that they have as a local authority. So Hammersmith and Fulham are really going out of their way almost to help you understand what they spend, where they spend it, and the type of businesses they need to help to meet those requirements. And most local authorities, most local larger tier 1, tier 2 private sector organisations as well will have something similar. Or if they haven't, guess what? You can ask. And if you ask, they're more likely that they will tell you because it shows initiative. You're starting to build a relationship with the prospects. They've even given you a breakdown of where they spend in terms of people. It's a big spend area for the council, and they do a lot of age-based accommodation. They do a lot of independent living, sort of home care services. And again, they show you and actually tell you what are the sort of businesses that could meet those requirements in terms of the supply chain. So have a think about this information and then think, where does your business fit in being able to deliver the services that they're looking to supply, they're looking to contract out. They've given an even more granular details of their sort of pipeline things they're planning to spend in the next sort of 2 to 3 years. So they've really gone a long way out of, to try and help local suppliers understand what are the sectors that how much do they spend, where do they spend it, what sort of businesses do they need to supply, and what's coming up? What sort of areas are they going to be probably tendering for in the coming 1 to 2 years? So again, you can have a look down the list, see where, this is all about people, see where basically your business might fit. They give you also a breakdown in terms of property, construction, capital expenditure, the types of things that they'll be putting out to tender, the types of areas, the sort of services they need. And then at council-wide level, the sort of categories where they are going to be spending and the sort of services they're going to be needing going forward in the next 2 years or so. So there's a lot of useful information out there. This is just an example, obviously using Hammersmith and Fulham, because you're obviously resident within the borough, you're based within the borough, but you can get this similar information for other councils, you can get it for the private sector as well. So don't be shy in asking, because the more you ask, and like I said earlier, the more you find out about your prospective client, the stronger position that you will be in to submit the winning bid. Right, so I said at the outset that there's a lot of benefits of this program, and some of the additional benefits are there are a number of different webinars and sessions that we're running. So I'll just briefly, the first two are the ones that I've been running. Hopefully they've been of some use and given you a degree of confidence and understanding as to what you need to do to start getting more familiar with bid writing and improving your response. There's also a webinar we're doing on a wider evaluation of your tender business model. That's a broader analysis of your business, looking at things like your value proposition, what's your USP, your strategy, how you come up with innovative solutions and ideas. I mentioned that you'll often be talking to procurement departments when you're dealing with public sector, local authorities, and also sometimes private sector authorities. We'll talk about and explain how you can engage more effectively with procurement departments, and how you design products and services that will help meet their requirements, because they're always going to be dealing on behalf of the end user within the client. So having an understanding of the procurement process, also very crucial. There's a project management session that will also be running, which is, again, very important to plan, very important to manage your tender response as a project. And I talked about that in detail, a bit more detail in the first session, where I'm saying, it could be something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet with allocated timelines, allocated responsibilities, stakeholders, and objectives, or it could be something much more comprehensive, but make sure you plan and project manage your process. And we've got a very practical explanation on how that works in one of our webinars. There's also a LinkedIn specialist we have, that's the marketing to tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, that's both public and private sector. We'll show you how to use LinkedIn to create more business opportunities, make key contacts, grow your brand, your reputation, improve your marketing, and hopefully all of that will lead towards more business. And then the circular economy one, that's a sort of an interesting one that SMEs are having to tackle now, and it's all around global challenges like climate change, waste management, pollution, sustainability, and how to better use and manage resources. And we'll also talk to you about how to develop key partnerships to help you along that road. And then we'll also be running a session on writing public sector bids and tenders, because they can be a little bit more unique in terms of their process and very specific. Again, I mentioned and talked a little bit about that in the first session, where you have to play by exactly the rules. And if you don't, you won't make that first cut. And then the final session that is at the bottom is actually going to be run in June sometime, and it's going to I think it will be a face-to-face session where we'll just get together a whole group of people from the council, from the procurement departments, from private sector companies locally, and give you a chance to sort of network, chat, have a presentation, get an understanding of what they want, how they need it. So there really is a lot of support out there for you as businesses. I know you've got a lot of demands on your time, but I would encourage you strongly to sort of get yourself registered on some, if not all of those, because they really can help you in terms of growing your business and winning those larger contracts that can often be a lot more lucrative. So as it says at the bottom, we'll be sending out the various registration Zoom links next week. Right, well, we're just about on time, I think, give or take a few minutes. So I just wanted to again just finally touch on the one-to-one sessions. Every business on the program, up to 80 companies, will be within Hammersmith and Fulham, will be eligible for a one-to-one confidential session with an experienced business advisor like myself. We have a number of experts who are going to be doing these sessions with you, and it will help you. They're very structured process. So it's not a bit of a chat. We'll agree specific objectives and goals and targets. We'll understand what your key challenges are, and then there'll be actions agreed for you to go away and work on. They'll help you with those, of course, will support you, will signpost you to get you in a better position to be, as I said at the outset, ready to submit expressions of interest. So we'll look at everything from the basics to right through to the writing and making sure you have things like the right policies, you're registered in the right portals. So very practical sessions which should help you get in a much stronger position. Well, that's just about it from me. Thank you very much for attending. I'm hoping you found that useful. The recording will be available, so if there's other people you think would benefit, do share it. And there's quite a few messages in the chat. So now, I don't know if there's any time, or if anyone has any particular questions that you'd like me to try and take now. But if so,
we have lots of time, Noshir, so we can extend it. So don't worry about the time. I think we should spend a few minutes on the chat. Have a look at this question from Max. Max, I hope you're still there. He says he's interested in professional services for urban design, transportation, and traffic in management. Can you go back to your slides, please, Noshir, on the on that slide where this was actually being covered?
Right. Sorry, give me a second. That was one of the council slides, I'm assuming. Is that right?
Yes, the council slides at the end.
Right.
We have another question from Sharon as well, so we need to just have a discussion.
Yeah, no problem. Give me a second.
Right. So it's within these 3 slides. It says professional services for urban design. If you go to the, okay, I just checked. This is probably covered here in the environment. Okay, so my suggestion is if you can have a look at chat and talk to Max and see how you can help him to engage with him on the one-to-one sessions. Same with Sharon as well, please.
Okay, well, I think that's probably something we can do offline one-to-one, and happy to have that conversation rather than sort of do that now. So, you know, my contact details now, I'm sure they have them. If not, I can certainly put them out there. But yeah, very, very happy to have a conversation offline with individuals if they have particular issues. And of course, you know, these are the sort of things that we can cover also in the one-to-one. So, you know, definitely, you know, get in touch with me and we'll get a one-to-one booked in. But if I can help a little bit earlier, I'll happily try and do that.
Okay, I'm just going to type in Noshir's address in case you don't have it already. It's noshir@branduin.co.uk. Please get in touch with him and he will be able to schedule a session with you.
Definitely.
Here we go. Okay, any more questions on chat, or we'll close in a minute or so? Many thanks to everyone for attending. Many thanks to you, Noshir, and thank you, Lisa, for hosting. I guess we can end it now. Many
Fantastic.
thanks.
Well, yeah, absolutely. No, do feel free to get in touch, and we'll get a one-to-one session booked in, and we'll do our best to get you in a better state for bidding and tendering for these larger contracts. And thanks again for your time.